Most people who have been through too much don't realize it's still shaping them until it starts quietly costing them something and they can't figure out why. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly. It shows up in the way emotions feel muted, in the way relationships feel harder to relax into, in the way life feels manageable, but rarely fulfilling. And the dangerous part is this. Most people mistake these changes for maturity. If you've ever been told you're calm in situations that should bother you, if people describe you as emotionally strong but rarely ask how you're actually doing, or if you've noticed that good moments don't land the way they used to, this isn't random. It's a psychological pattern that forms when someone carries more emotional weight than their system was designed for. And while it once helped you survive, it may now be quietly limiting how much of life you're actually able to feel. That doesn't mean something is wrong with you, but it also doesn't mean this pattern is neutral. And the part that makes it dangerous is not what people usually think. When someone goes through too much, the mind doesn't collapse, it reorganizes. Not around joy, not around meaning, around efficiency. The brain learns which emotions are costly, which reactions create instability, which expectations lead to disappointment. So it begins filtering experience. You don't consciously decide to feel less. You just stop giving full access to emotions that once overwhelmed you. At first, this feels like control, like growth, like emotional intelligence. But here's the part most people never stop to question. Quiet doesn't always mean peaceful. Sometimes it means disconnected. And if you're honest, you already know the difference. Because calm that comes from safety feels open. Calm that comes from adaptation feels tight. One allows you to settle, the other keeps you watching. This is where the first cost appears. When emotional control becomes automatic, presence becomes conditional. You're not anxious, you're not numb, you're alert, always scanning, always measuring. From the outside, this looks like maturity. From the inside, it feels like being slightly removed from your own life. The nervous system doesn't forget what it once had to survive. When uncertainty used to carry consequences, your body learned to anticipate. So you notice shifts others miss, tone changes, pauses, energy changes in a room. People call it intuition. But intuition built under pressure doesn't turn off when life becomes safer. And this is where the pattern deepens. Because awareness that once protected you now keeps you from fully settling. Joy that requires surrender feels unfamiliar. Consistency feels suspicious. Calm moments feel temporary. Not because you expect something bad to happen, but because your system learned that stability never lasted. Here is the midpoint most people never see. This psychology doesn't just protect you from pain, it slowly disconnects you from joy, not dramatically, not tragically, but quietly. Life doesn't feel bad, it feels muted. You still function, you still show up, you still handle things, but something narrows. You may feel relief when plans cancel and then guilt for feeling relieved. You may notice yourself observing good moments instead of being inside them. You may mistake peace for emptiness and call it being fine. And because nothing is technically wrong, this disconnection often goes unexamined. That's what makes it dangerous. And here's why this matters more than most people realize. This pattern doesn't just shape how you feel now. It quietly sets a ceiling on how deeply you're able to feel later. If it stays unexamined, this doesn't stabilize, it settles. Not into numbness, not into crisis, into a narrower emotional range that slowly becomes your normal. This is how people don't notice what they've lost, because nothing disappears suddenly. It just stops growing. Joy doesn't vanish, it plateaus. Connection doesn't break, it stays shallow. And one day, years later, people look back and realize they didn't become less emotional. They just stopped accessing the parts of themselves that once felt alive. Not because they chose that life, but because this pattern was never interrupted. Here's the part that's uncomfortable and easy to avoid thinking about. This pattern doesn't stay still. It doesn't pause where it is and wait for you to decide what to do with it. It tightens. What begins as emotional control slowly becomes emotional narrowing. What begins as awareness becomes distance. What begins as independence becomes isolation, not because you want it to, but because habits compound when they're left unquestioned. Most people assume that staying the same is neutral. It isn't. In this psychology, staying the same means feeling slightly less next year than you do now, trusting a little later, opening a little slower, letting fewer moments reach you fully. Not enough to notice all at once, just enough to matter over time. This is how people wake up one day emotionally functional, socially capable, outwardly stable, and quietly disconnected from the depth they used to have access to. Not because something went wrong, but because nothing interrupted the pattern. And the most dangerous part is this: the longer this goes unexamined, the more normal it feels. By the time someone realizes they're living smaller emotionally, it doesn't feel like loss anymore. It just feels like who they are. And here's what almost no one tells you: patterns like this don't just become familiar, they become harder to reverse. Not impossible, but slower. What once took awareness now takes effort. What once shifted with insight now resists change. This is why some people look back years later and realize they don't feel things the way they used to, not because they chose numbness, but because adaptation quietly became identity. And the longer that identity settles, the more unfamiliar depth begins to feel. When reactions feel bigger than they should, a small comment lingering, a subtle shift creating unease, it's not the present moment your body is responding to. It's resemblance. Your nervous system reacts to echoes before logic catches up. So instead of reacting outwardly, you internalize it. You withdraw slightly. You quiet yourself. Not because you don't want resolution, but because revisiting old emotional pathways feels expensive. This constant regulation takes energy, not dramatic exhaustion, quiet exhaustion, shorter replies, less expression, more distance. When people ask if you're okay, you say yes, not to hide, but because explaining feels heavier than enduring. Alongside this exhaustion, something else forms. A kind of intelligence. You learn to read what isn't said, to sense discomfort before it's named, to notice when behavior doesn't match words. This makes you perceptive, emotionally literate, deeply aware. It can also make you absorb more than you release if boundaries aren't learned. And beneath all of this adaptation, there is often a grief most people never name. Not for people, not for moments, but for versions of yourself that never had space to exist. The version who trusted easily. The version who didn't analyze every outcome. The version who felt safe without preparation. This grief doesn't break you, but it does shape you. It makes peace meaningful, sincerity valuable, safety sacred. Here's where clarity matters. This psychology didn't form randomly. Sensitivity formed because awareness was once necessary. Caution formed because safety wasn't guaranteed. Depth formed because surface-level understanding was never enough. This is intelligence shaped by experience. But intelligence without reflection becomes limitation. Because what once protected you can quietly continue narrowing your emotional world long after the danger has passed. Strength for people who have been through too much doesn't look dramatic. It looks like restraint, like steadiness, like endurance. But survival does not have to remain the default. Understanding this psychology doesn't mean you need to reject it. It means you can no longer let it run unchecked. Because what happens next is no longer automatic. The same system that kept you safe will keep limiting you, unless you consciously decide what still serves you and what no longer does. And that decision is uncomfortable because it means letting go of patterns that once saved you. But it's also where this psychology stops being a reaction and becomes a responsibility.